In this video, we're going to be talking about high rear. What are the main things that cause it? What are the anatomical landmarks and what you can do to fix it? How's it going? My name is Raul from QBN Kennels. I've been breeding for about 10 years. And even though I don't know everything, what I do know, I like to share it with you. We're going to break everything down in layman's terms so anybody can understand what we're talking about. However, there's a lot of components involved. So if you have a hard time understanding the first time, I suggest you watch this video how many times you need to in order to get this information. Without further ado, let's dive in. One of the first causes of a high rear actually has nothing to do with high rear. You're probably wondering, what is this guy talking about? In reality, it can happen, and it happens a lot of times, when dogs actually have either shorter limbs or something going on in the front, which will cause the dog's rear to actually seem like it's high, when in reality, the issues that we're dealing with are in the front. The main example I could think of is pocket bullies. A lot of pockets are walking around with a particular type of dwarfism. And all dwarfism is an over-exaggeration of short limbs or lack thereof of growth. The term that is used for this is achondroplasia. And this is a 19th century term. And we're going to break, and this is a 19th century term. We're going to break it down so I could show you what achondroplasia actually means. And the term can be broken down by A, coming from English, chondros coming from cartilage in Greek, plasia coming from molding in Greek, and ia at the end coming from English. Essentially, what's happening is cartilage is actually being made into bone, and therefore you have ossification or the making of bone, and therefore you have achondroplasia. Achondroplasia meaning basically without cartilage. That's essentially what it's meaning, because that cartilage is being turned into bone. Now, if we take a look at this illustration, as you can see here, it's talking about high rear, sway back with dwarfism, right? But what's really affecting this particular dog is the front limbs are not as long as the rear limbs. And therefore, that's going to affect your high rear. Also, the longer the back is not helping, because the longer the back you have, the harder it is for you to have it perfectly straight, because any irregularity, any mishap, any 1 millimeter here and 1 millimeter there is going to show in the long run. This, by the way, this is a saddleback or a sway back, as what it's called. Now, guys, this can be caused whenever you have a dog that has dwarfism. For example, a pocket male that has dwarfism that you breed to a standard female. This can also be true. And the reason that is true is because the pup is inheriting front limbs from dad and back limbs from mom. Okay, this is also a possibility. This is one of the reasons why, coming up as a breeder, I was always told never breed outside of 2 inches difference at the height of the withers, because you run the risk of having a situation like this. So this is pretty much an anatomical chart for the American Bully, and the withers are right here, guys, right here, right? So yeah, I understand where the shoulders are, but the withers are more to the middle of the dog's body. That's where the withers lie. And you don't want to go above 2 inches in a breeding, because if you have a dog that's got shorter limbs in the front and he inherits, say, his dad's shorter limbs and mom's taller rear, and then you're going to have that funny car looking dog. And that's what I was just talking about. So how do you go about fixing that? How do you fix the fact that you have a dog whose front limbs are a little bit shorter than the actual rear? My recommendation for that is to go to a dog that is as clean as possible, and preferably a little bit taller, okay? Never to go above those 2 inches. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you're dealing with a pocket who's got shorter limbs, more likely than not, you're probably dealing with some sort of dwarfism. Going to a taller dog is going to break the genetic chains that are forcing that dog to have dwarfism in the front, and you're resetting everything. If you were to ask me what dog in my yard would do that, I would probably recommend a dog like Fireball. Now, if you notice, Fireball is not overdone in any way, shape, or form. He's pretty symmetrical. This is an earlier picture of him. Okay, everything is where it's supposed to be, and that's what you want to breed to. I don't have a side shot of him right now, but you got to trust me when I say he also has a short back. And the shorter back is going to help tremendously with getting everything else calibrated to where it needs to be. Now, there is something else that may cause the dog's front to come down and make the rear seem high. And that's nothing more than down pasterns. So you're probably asking, Raul, where are the pasterns at? Well, they're right here. That's the pastern. And let me show you what a down pastern is. This right here is a down pastern. Okay. They need to be looking like this, okay, but in reality, they're looking like that. That's a down pastern, okay? Also, when you have a flat-footed dog, you're also going to be losing up to ½ an inch in height if you were to measure the front limbs to the rear limbs, and that's simply because it doesn't have the padding that it needs. Remember I said the longer the back, the less forgiving it is. In other words, it shows where there is an unbalance. Also, splayed feet, you may have the same issue if you have splayed feet with flat feet, but also the hair feet, okay? Hair feet are very similar to down pasterns. In fact, many dogs I've seen with hair feet end up having down pasterns. So what's causing all this? As far as hair feet, it is totally genetic. Now, down pasterns, on the other hand, a lot of time it has to do with either you're feeding a pup or a dog way too much, or the type of food that you're feeding doesn't have the nutrients that it actually needs. On down pasterns, you want to make sure, especially if you have a pup, to be feeding no more than 13 to 15% protein. So if you have a bag of kibble that says 30% and say you're feeding an entire cup's worth, okay, of kibble daily, what I want you to do is go about halfway, fill it up with rice, and fill that other half with kibble, and you're halving the protein that puppy's taking in. So let's talk about vitamin C, because vitamin C has everything to do with the reparation of muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage. And when we're talking about dog structure, we're dealing with exactly the same thing. So your dog's ability to take in vitamin C and have it available for daily reparations, it is totally key in your dog structure. So check this out. Vitamin C degrades when exposed to heat, light, oxygen, and prolonged storage. It's also susceptible to degradation when exposed to moisture or high humidity, meaning storage. I brought this up on purpose for you to understand that if you're feeding kibble within itself, just because it's going to be stored for a long period of time, is going to allow vitamin C to degrade. In addition to that, vitamin C degrades most anywhere between 185 to 194 degrees Fahrenheit. If you read, vitamin C is most vulnerable to degradation at higher temperatures, with the highest destruction occurring between 85 and 95 degrees Celsius. However, degradation can also occur at lower temperatures, and extent of degradation depends on factors like storage time and the presence of oxygen. How did I know that between 185 degrees and 194 degrees Fahrenheit is when vitamin C degrades or breaks down the most? Well, I pretty much just looked it up. And as you can see here at the high end, it's 194. When you go down to 85 degrees Celsius, it comes out to 185 degrees. Now, this is key, guys. If you have a dog that is perfectly fine, however, he or she is not getting the appropriate amount of vitamin C, what's going to happen is they're going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul. What I mean is their body's going to prioritize their essential organs, such as the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the liver, okay, with essential nutrients that are coming in. Then whatever's left over it will be appropriated to what isn't a priority, which would end up being the limbs, the front legs and the back legs. And if you don't have enough vitamin C to go around, well, that's when you're going to have an issue, because the vitamin C was used up to repair, whatever was going on in the heart or the liver or any other vital organ. If you have very little left over, then at that point, you really get either very minimal or no reparation at all in the dog's soft tissues, like we said, ligaments, cartilage, tendons. It is there where you can cause orthopedic issues within your dog, especially if they're growing, because dogs' bone plates do not seal until they're roughly 24 months old. So if you're only out here feeding kibble and you're noticing your dog has down pasterns, if you're not supplementing with something that's going to give them vitamin C, that's going to be most bioavailable, then you can be the one actually causing what's happening to your dog. I like to take this moment to remind you that the two supplements that we use here at QBN is Nuvet and NuJoint DS. Nuvet, we give 1 wafer per dog per day if they're 5 pounds or more. And NuJoint, it is totally weight-based. Now, if you recall, I was just talking about the vitamin C. Vitamin C is already here in its most appropriate form, along with other minerals that are necessary for your dog. Now, the beauty of Nuvet and NuJoint DS is that it's totally cold pressed and it isn't cooked, therefore making the vitamin C and all the other vitamins and minerals totally appropriate and bioavailable for your dog. This is why so many people write to us and they show us the example like the one I'm showing you now. Over here, you're seeing the dog without Nuvet. Here, you're seeing the dog with Nuvet 10 days later. You see how these are down pasterns? Well, they were caused by the owner because all he did was feed kibble. Within 10 days, look at the difference. Now, our ordering code is 513237. You could either go straight to nuvet.com and put /513237, or we're going to go ahead and leave a link down in the description below. Now, the other cause for high rear is lack of rear angulation. So let's go back to our anatomy chart. And over here, the stifle is usually where it's showing you what type of angulation your dog actually has. If it has good angulation or a lack thereof, this is going to be the area I want you looking at. And this is called, like I said, the stifle. So this is what a stifle is correctly supposed to look like. Look at the angulation. This is correct angulation right here. Okay. Now, let me show you over angulation. Okay. As you can see here, the leg is, he's got the angulation, but look how far out it's coming, right? It's coming out a lot further. And that's because this particular bone is longer than the one here, right? Which then brings us to the stiff stifle. And I see this a lot. A lot of times you could see it in pockets. Remember, we were just talking about, they have either down pasterns or shorter limbs, but sometimes you see a lot of this in the smaller breeds. You can also see it in XLs, but I see it mostly in the smaller ones. And this right here, what you're seeing is a lack of rear angulation. Look at the angulation here versus the angulation right here, or the lack thereof. There is none. It's almost as if though the dog is walking on stilts. Here's a better shot at it where you can see the correct angulation versus, okay, and this is what I'm talking about with the pockets, right? You still have somewhat semblance of angulation, but because there's dwarfism involved, the length of the bones and the shape of the bones are somewhat different. So you see more. If you look at the rear, you're going to notice more straight down rather than here at the stifle area. And that has to do because of the bone lengths. So how do you clear stiff stifles? Okay, so stiff stifles is completely genetic. Therefore, when it's completely genetic, the only way you're going to fix it is going to be with genetics. Now, don't get me wrong. You can sit here and give your dog Nuvet and NuJoint DS, and they're probably going to need it because they're probably going to be having a lot of issues in the rear, especially as they begin to age. However, I make no claim that Nuvet and NuJoint DS are going to go ahead and clear stiff stifles. That is completely genetic. And the only way you're going to fix it is when you take a dog that's got stiff stifles to a dog that has a higher COI, okay, or COI. What that means is coefficient of inbreeding. Now, I'm not trying to throw a term at you to confuse you or anything like that. Think of COI as how strong a dog's blood is, okay? That's how we speak in breeding terms. In reality, there's two types of genes. There's a dominant gene where irregardless if this gene looks like it, he's going to express. And then there are recessive genes that have to be identical in order to be able to express. Recessive genes outnumber dominant genes by a great majority, like 99-1 type of deal. And I mention that because the coefficient of inbreeding only takes into account the recessive genes. And even though it's not 100%, it's 99% of the equation. So the logic behind it is, if stiff stifles is coming up because it got one gene from dad and one from mom that are identical, then if we break that, you no longer have a stiff stifle. Now, I am very much simplifying it in layman's terms and making it very simple. But in reality, what I just showed you, that is just one particular gene. These types of scenarios go into what are called polygenetic chains that could be from a length of 2 to 1,000 easily. But nonetheless, the process is still the same. You want to break those identical stiff stifle genes by bringing in non-stiff stifle genes. Therefore, this gene cannot express, because in order to express, they got to be identical. I hope my breakdown was simple enough for you to understand. If you need to rewind and rewatch that part, do it, because it is the essence of breeding. In order to fix stiff stifles, you want to get a dog that has a higher COI than your dog with stiff stifles. And what that means is it's got stronger recessive genes than the one that your dog with stiff stifle has. Therefore, he or she should be able to beat him out. Now, with that being said, if you do a breeding like that and say you had 10 puppies, are all 10 puppies going to come out without stiff stifles? More likely than not, no. But the greater majority, meaning 6 out of 10, should come out without stiff stifles. With that being said, you may still have a lack of rear angulation because the lengths of the femur and everything else going on in that area may not have been able to reset appropriately in just that one breeding. This is why I've made it clear over and over again throughout my videos that stiff stifles is one of those faults that I would prefer to walk away from, because sometimes it can take you 3 to 4 generations to be able to fix. Every generation equates to 2 years for you waiting for that female to be mature. So if you got to wait 6 to 8 years just to fix that one flaw, at least for me as a breeder, it's really not worth it. The other thing you have to be very careful of, in my opinion, is feeding your dogs either chicken livers or beef livers. Why is that? It's because in this country, we actually inject our animals with growth hormones, antibiotics, steroids, so on and so forth. And by feeding these livers to our dogs, whether it's through a raw diet or a cooked diet, you really don't know how the dog is going to respond to the levels of steroids or growth hormones that are already in there. And that's basically another reason why I use Nuvet and NuJoint DS. I substitute the actual livers for actually Nuvet and NuJoint DS. Why is that? Because I know for a fact that there's no steroids or growth hormone or any of that coming through this. One other thing that's really important, steroids prevent inflammation in the body. The body's way to repair itself is through inflammation. You ever broken a bone or hurt yourself? Typically, there's going to be inflammation in that area for a prolonged period of time. And as you heal, inflammation goes down. Steroid counters inflammation. In other words, it prevents it. And even though it's going to bring some short-term relief, it could actually cause injury in the long term. So if you don't want to take my word for it, that's fine. Do your research on both chicken and beef livers, and you'll understand why it is we don't feed that here. Lastly, the last thing that will cause a high rear is going to be injury. Nobody really talks about this because a lot of times people don't realize this. But if you get yourself a new pup, do yourself a favor. Don't let that puppy jump up and down from the sofa. And please don't have them jump into or out of your truck. That's the fastest way that they could jam their growth plates. And again, their growth plates do not heal until they're 24 months old. If you do have a pup that comes up limping, you definitely want to make sure you keep them lightweight. You don't want a heavy pup with an injury, because that's when these bone plates can actually either shift or stunt growth. So keep your puppies light, let them be pups. Make sure they're not jarring or jumping from the sofa or from a truck or a car or anything like that. So let's go over a quick recap. These are the main causes of a high rear and its quick fix. First one we said was short limbs. And the way you fix it is breeding to a dog with longer limbs with a higher COI, or coefficient of inbreeding. The second we spoke about was a lack of rear angulation. And again, the easy fix is breed to a dog that's got a higher COI with better rear angulation. Next, we said stiff stifles. Again, breed to a dog with a higher COI that's got good rear angulation, preferably with a short back. Number 4 was long back. Again, the way you do it is you're going to use a dog that's got a higher COI with a shorter back, and you're going to breed to it. Number 5 on the list was down pasterns. Remember I said keep the pups light, keep the protein between 13 and 15%. Make sure you're giving Nuvet and NuJoint DS. And lastly is injury. Avoid your pup from jarring their bones, from jumping off of the sofa, off the truck, or anything like that. Real quick, let me just let you know, if you like this conversation and you like this type of platform, we go live every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. CST. That's Central Standard Time, Texas time for you. Make sure to jump in and watch and listen, because we're always talking about these types of discussions as to how we can breed better, how we can give our dogs better nutrition, better exercise, and everything else in between. If you want to join the discussion for as little as $5 a month, you could be a member of this channel, and we will answer your question before we finish the live. Also, always scroll down to descriptions below. If we have anything that we make going forward that has to do with this subject matter, we're going to leave the links down below in description. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're going to be talking about how to fix east-west in your dogs right here in this next video. Be Raul from the Q. I'll be catching you right over here.